Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast with Blaha. I'm having Greek yogurt, frozen blueberries, and almond butter. All right, let's talk about accessory work. Now, you'll hear people talk about checking your ego on your accessory work, or, we're not competing in the accessory Olympics, and people will interpret that differently than they should. They'll hear that and they'll say, oh, that means we shouldn't care about the weight on the bar or the dumbbell on accessory work. And that is a complete misinterpretation of that idea. It's a complete misinterpretation of that idea. Now, as far as the actual checking of the ego, something I've had to go back through recently. All right, you guys have seen me not that long ago start getting, again, my ego getting in the way. Doing a lot more touch and go, right? Sometimes short stroking the ranges of motion significantly on accessory work, and I've had to reassess that, reel it back in, and dedicate my focus and most of my training to doing these movements correctly. And we're all guilty of this. This is something that we all need to be reminded of sometimes. I have to be reminded, or remind myself sometimes. I have to remind my lifters, and a lot of people out there have to remember that. You have to get their ego in check. But that doesn't mean the weight doesn't matter. There's a big difference between those two. Because you'll also hear stupid stuff like, well, this bodybuilder made all these gains because he knows how to make 20 pounds feel like 100. I'm not talking about making it feel heavy. Because a lot of the methods that they use to do that have been proven in labs to cause less muscle growth. The bodybuilder gets away with that because he's on enough drugs. He's on enough drugs that quality training stimulus may not even matter that much. And if he can use a really lightweight, he's just less likely to get hurt sometimes because of what he's doing. And that's not even always true. But it's not because he makes the lightweight feel harder by doing stuff like really super slow training or pre-exhaustion or any of this stuff that we know causes less hypertrophy. This has all been studied. It's inferior training stimulus. But what do we mean? How about taking an exercise through its full effective range of motion? That's a big one. Does that mean full range of motion? Not every time. Not every time. Because we have safe ranges of motion, we have effective ranges of motion, and then we have just plain not doing it correctly. All right? You're just pumping in the middle on an exercise. Well, that's not stimulating maximal growth. You'll see guys, well, even on these dumbbell chest presses, I don't lock out because that would be all tricep and I'm trying to work my chest. And it's like, okay, please don't ever try to teach anybody. And you're going to fail. You're going to fail your biomechanics classes if you take one. You're suggesting the lockout. Watch my chest contract in the middle. You're suggesting the lockout doesn't work the chest. There are muscle fibers in the chest that are only worked during the lockout. You're just going to ignore those muscle fibers and pretend that you're getting better chest stimulus? Come on. No, that's being stupid. That's being ignorant of basic physiology. Talking about an effective range of motion. Right? I'll give you an example of an exercise that's not a good range of motion. How about going all the way down on dips? That will destroy your shoulders over time. That's an example of, hey, that's an exercise we shouldn't take through the full range of motion. It's not safe. It's not safe. And we don't need every exercise to go through a long range of motion. A perfect example, the bench press causes great chest stimulus even though the bar stops on the chest. But then again, you'll have clowns out there saying, oh, only take it to 90 degrees, and then they don't even touch their chest. Well, no, that's just being dumb. That's actually dangerous too. There are muscles where we have active insufficiency issues. Right? There's a certain point where it's not adding any extra stimulus to go deeper. Or certain muscles don't get any more stimulus. Again, we have ranges of motion like I existed to where they're dangerous. And that's one example. Depending upon things like your shoulder structure, everything else going on. But I promise you, you do enough really deep dips, so you will eventually get hurt. Yeah, it will damage your shoulders eventually. So there are cases where we shouldn't, but what we should be looking at is, are we going through a full, relatively close to a full effective range of motion? Right? Are we bouncing out of the bottom on lifts? And it's one thing, there's different forms of bounce. Again, we can use chest presses as an example. Coming all the way down and getting a stretch reflex with dumbbells, right, and not pausing and using that stretch reflex. It's not bouncing, it's using a stretch reflex in the muscle. Well, that has a hypertrophic response. And we usually end up going a little deeper when we do it that way. But we're using that stretch reflex in the pectoral. Okay, that's not bad. But if we bounce the bar off of our chest on a bench, not as good. I'd argue that pause benching will give you more chest involvement, right? Because you're having to restart the weight at the stretch position on the pec. The pec is having to fire harder to get the weight started. That's also why, again, the difference between pause benching and touch and go benching for testing your max. All right? But you can combine two different lifts together to get that. You can get that the best possible range of motion of both those lifts. You can lock both of them out. You should lock them both out, right? If you want complete chest stimulation. Plus, even if it was a bunch more tricep, most people need more tricep. You're going to train your triceps also. We're doing big multi-joint movements. We should be trying to get multiple muscles bigger doing them. That's the idea. It's kind of why we do them. Training economy, right? Getting a full effective range of motion, not bouncing out of the bottom of your chins. Chin-ups and coming all the way down. Trying to get the last bit of stretch that your anatomy allows for. And going up as high as your anatomy allows for, without having to roll yourself up over the bar, because that's no longer using your lats, right? You're having to rotate the shoulder, that's a little different. Going through an effective range of motion. Not cheating it, not bouncing, having some control. Because why do we do accessory movements? We do them for hypertrophy. That's it. That's why we do accessory work, is to get bigger. That's the purpose of it. Because if we build the muscles involved with a lift, we get stronger at that lift. It's where most of the foundation of our strength comes from. We do it to get bigger. Now, that also means that we do care about weight on the bar. That's the downside when we discuss this stuff. People are like, oh, well, I'm just going for a pump and a burn. It's like, mechanical tension matters. Mechanical tension is important for myofibular hypertrophy. You should be adding weight to it, right? You don't just say, oh, I'm just going to keep trying to go to a challenge or to a pump and keep the same weight on. Well, you're not going to get bigger from that. You're going to stop gaining muscle eventually. That's why the whole trying to make it feel heavy doesn't work. We should have control. We should be using a complete range of motion, or close to our full effective range of motion. Shouldn't be bouncing and cheating on these movements. Although there are examples to where that creates an eccentric overload. Push press, high pull, right? Not even necessarily bad if you're doing it for the eccentric overload. But generally speaking, we need to have control. But the weight on the bar or the dumbbell or the cable, it does matter. Because we still need progressive overload to get a muscle bigger. We have to have that. We need progressive tension over time. Not cheating, though, to get more weight on there. All right, guys. Well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.